by the Prowler. Halloween is a fun, exciting holiday for most, especially the children who dress up in their costumes and walk the neighborhoods in search of treats. Halloween, however, is also an ancient and some would say magical time of the year, a day celebrated by ancient Celtic and pagan tribes, and a day where some believe the dead can return to visit their loved ones. While those ancient beliefs and traditions have faded over the course of time, Halloween is still a special day of the year, celebrated by most, and it's no different with the fine people who inhabit the small town of Rook's Point. The night of Halloween can have a special effect on people, and maybe it'll have a special effect on Rorden Hurley on this Halloween night. Rorden hasn't had the kindest of childhoods, which has led into not-so-kind teenage years as well. He comes from a broken home, and he lost his older sister, who happened to be his closest friend, in a car accident while they were both teenagers. He was also in the car and was lucky to survive. Life hasn't been too kind for Rorden. He lives alone, has no loved ones, works at the local grocery store stocking shelves, but isn't physically strong. Never has been. As a matter of fact, he's always been ridiculed by the other kids he grew up with for his scrawny frame. He still gets teased and pushed around because of it. Lonely and isolated, he moves through life in this small town of Rook's Point, going from work to home, daily and nightly, while being mocked by others along the way. This Halloween might have something more pleasant in store for him, however. While he was stocking some cans of soup on the shelf, Trudy walked up to him. She was a cashier in the store and Rorden's crush since high school. They exchanged hellos and some small talk. They were friendly. She was never one of the kids that made fun of him while growing up. They were never great friends, but friendly and polite. Out of nowhere, though, she said, "The reason I came over to talk to you was because I wanted to invite you to a Halloween party at my house tonight." He was, of course, shocked at the invitation. No one had ever asked him to go anywhere. He didn't have any friends at all, but he quickly shook away the shock and confusion and accepted the invitation. She smiled at him, told him the time the party started, and walked away. He remained crouched as a smile formed across his face. "I finally have something to do. I've finally been invited somewhere. Maybe things are finally changing for the better," he thought. It never seemed to fail, though. Someone on a daily basis wanted to mess with him. Later on in his shift, a group of teenagers entered the store. He had the mop and bucket and was tending to a spill that needed cleaning up. They started teasing him, as they always did. Most of the group were the younger siblings of the kids that used to tease him when he was a kid. So the vicious circle continued. They circled him, and one of the teenagers took his mop. He told them to give it back. They began to mock him and taunt him with it. When he had had enough and started towards the teenager holding the mop, they threw the mop towards his legs, causing him to trip and crash into the bucket filled with water. They all started laughing at him until they were told to leave by the manager. He got himself up, more embarrassed than in pain, but didn't let the incident ruin his mood. It was almost clock-out time, and he had a party to get ready for. Well, it's true, he had never been invited to a Halloween party. He was already prepared. He already had a costume, even with such short notice. You see, he loved the horror genre. Books, movies, games, you name it. He loved it. So he figured why not go as his favorite horror movie character, Michael Myers. He had the blue mechanic jumpsuit. He, of course, had the mask. It was perfect. He jumped in the shower and quickly got dressed. It was now night as he left his house. The streets and neighborhoods were filled with parents and their children trick-or-treating. The night air felt cool and crisp. As he excitedly made his way down the street, he felt alive for the first time in his life. He had never felt the way he was feeling at that moment and couldn't explain the reason for it if you asked him. He felt safe and strong. No one knew it was him underneath the Michael Myers mask, so no one made fun of him as he walked by. On this Halloween night, he felt like a new person, reborn, if you will. When he finally made it to Trudy's house, he walked up to the door and knocked. She answered, and he raised up his mask to show it was him underneath. She smiled and told him she was glad that he could make it and invited him in. As he entered, he could see the party was filled with the people he grew up with, who ridiculed him and made fun of him his entire life growing up. He quickly lowered his mask back down so no one could see it was him. He realized, of course, a lot of those people would be here, since everyone knew each other and grew up together. The thought just slipped his mind earlier in the excitement. He brushed it off, though, and was determined to have a good time. Nobody knew it was him yet underneath the mask, and he took advantage of it. He danced with a few girls who weren't so kind to him growing up, in particular Mindy Hickman, who was quite nasty to him in high school. They danced to a couple of songs, all the while thinking what she would say if she knew it was him underneath the mask. He then moved on and had a dance with Trudy. Afterwards, he asked where the bathroom was. He was starting to get hot dancing in the mask all night and wanted to go take it off and splash some water on his face to cool down. When he came back from the bathroom, it had seemed word spread around to everyone who was behind the Michael Myers mask. Riordan was scared at first. All the memories of his past flashed through his mind as he was getting ready for everyone to start making fun of him like they always do. But no one seemed to have a problem that he was there. The party continued into the night. There were Halloween games and food and more dancing. The alcohol was flowing, and so was the drugs, as a matter of fact. After hours and hours of all that is when everything changed, however. All those happy party people who didn't care who was there, they just wanted to have a good time, turned back into the people they were when they were all growing up. A group of the guys started making fun of him, calling him names like they used to in school. Then one by one, it spread across the rest of the people at the party. The girls who danced with him were now grossed out by him and told him they felt sick when they touched him. One by one, everyone started to laugh and make fun of him. He stood there and felt lost and alone, like he always had throughout his life. He pushed his way through the crowd and made his way into the kitchen. He needed to get away from everyone. He stood there alone, trying to catch his breath. He raised the mask up so he could breathe. As he was starting to calm down, Trudy walked in. She had always been decent to him, always kinder than the rest. He thought she came in to console him, maybe say a few kind words, but he was wrong. Instead, she said thank you for ruining my party. She called him a loser and said she should never have invited him. Who knows why she said what she said, but her cruelness was the last straw. When she told him to get out and left the kitchen, he pulled his mask back on and felt a rush of anger and power, the likes he had never felt before. He reached over and pulled the butcher knife out of the block and went back into the party. He made his way past everyone to the front door, listening to more insults as he passed, everyone telling him to leave and calling him names. As he reached the front door, however, instead of leaving, he locked it and put the chain across the hinge. He gripped the large butcher knife tightly and slowly turned. Most everyone became silent, just staring at him, wondering what was going on, except for a couple of the guys who were talking their shit. They died first. When he butchered the first couple of people, everyone screamed. He then went to work, massacring everyone and anyone who crossed his path, their screams of pain and terror being drowned out by the loud music. No one on the outside knew what was happening on the inside. One by one, room by room, he butchered everyone, taking out a lifetime's worth of pain and torture he suffered at the hands of these people, with a power he had never felt in his entire life. On this Halloween night, he was no longer the weak and scrawny kid everyone had always made fun of. He was strong and ruthless and killed with a purpose. After disposing of everyone, he heard a whimper in the corner as he walked back into the living room. It was Trudy. She sat in the corner and begged for her life. She said she was sorry. He then plunged the butcher knife into her heart and left her to die, choking on her own blood. He then left and made his way back home. It was late into the night, and there was hardly a soul out. The night air was cool and made him feel alive. He didn't want this new feeling to end. Just then, he heard laughing and the sounds of smashing. It was the teenage punks from the store earlier who taunted him and caused him to trip and fall. They were smashing pumpkins and ransacking the neighborhood. The magic of Halloween wasn't done with Rorden yet. On this night, he pulled his Michael Myers mask back down and gripped his butcher knife, for he had more revenge to attend to. Jack by the Prowler. Do you know of the origin of the jack-o'-lantern? No? Well, let me tell you. It started in a wee village in Ireland with a wee nasty lad named Jack O'Leary, who grew up to be a nasty gentleman. He robbed from the old, he stole from the poor, he harassed the village women, and his crimes even escalated to murder. His deeds could never be proven. There were never witnesses, so he continued to torment the village. No one was safe, not the old, not the young, nor the sick or the meek. If you had what he wanted, he'd take it with no warning and no remorse. The villagers barricaded themselves in their homes when Jack approached, hoping and praying he'd pass them by, until one Halloween he went too far. He murdered a child, a wee girl named Gwyneth. Well, that was the last straw. They cornered Jack in a pumpkin patch. They cut a hole in the top of a pumpkin and shoved his head inside and set it on fire. He kicked and he screamed as he died slowly, writhing on the ground. He cursed the town with his last dying breath. vowing to return. So the townspeople carve faces and stick candles inside pumpkins and call them Jack-o'-lanterns to make sure Jack doesn't come back seeking revenge. The same kid has been trick-or-treating me for the last 10 years. Halloween is right around the corner, and it's the time of year I dread more than any other, more than the anniversary of my father's death, or when I have to elbow people out of the way for TVs on Black Friday. And it all started a decade ago. I was 25 back then, and the first time I felt too old to go out knocking on my neighbors' doors asking for sweets. I had not long moved out of my parents' house and had found a quiet little house share with 3 other guys. They had all gone to get pissed while I stayed in doing work that was long overdue. Halloween that year was a typical cheesy 80s movie affair. The wind was howling like a starved wolf, and the rain lashed harder than a sadistic master. The whole gimmick bored me rigid, so when the first group of children turned up begging for charity, I promptly shut the door in their faces. Their costumes were profoundly homemade, with a bargain supermarket vibe to all of them. Lack of imagination. It was around 10:30 p.m. that I first saw the kid. He couldn't have been any older than 8. He was with 3 other children, decked head to toe in flowing black robes, with an assortment of grim reaper masks. This one lad, however, had gone all out, or more likely his parents had, to terrify. He wore rags so tattered and torn that they could hardly be called clothes. He was barefoot, with his feet scabbed and ripped and covered in congealed blood. His skin had been discolored to give it a putrefied appearance. There was, however, no odor to him. As I fixated upon the boy, I began to realize that none of his companions seemed to notice he was there, nor the spine-chilling gash that ran across his neck, or how his eyes bulged with a permanent sense of horror. While I was clearing away the other kids, this one boy just stood and stared right at me. He made no movement other than to offer a festering right hand to me, presumably for sweets. I finally snapped out of my delirium and slammed the door in his face. That was 10 years ago, and I still remember every rivulet of water running down his face. How he didn't seem to register the burning cold against his ruined skin. How he gave no response when I told him, "Get the F off my garden." That night, I didn't answer the door to any more disturbers because I sensed that the kid would still be out there. When I went to bed that night, I checked quickly out my bedroom window, which overhung the front door. To see him standing at the end of my garden, staring into my face, arms still extended. I had woke the following morning to find my property, thankfully, childless, and I began to put him down to being more of a symptom of my tiring day at work, and slowly my brain deleted him from its cachet. That was until the following October 31st. Fewer trick-or-treaters that year, just a handful of people barely even trying to spook. Some even asking for money. It was becoming increasingly clear that Halloween was falling by the wayside in the neighborhood. I myself was content to settle myself in my living room. My housemates had all moved out and left me over the last 12 months, with bourbon and a few softcore movies, and fall into a deep sleep, which I was rudely awoken from at 10:30 on the dot. That's not to say that something woke me, but I was definitely jerked out of a potentially nice slumber. I was hit by that fairly common chill that some people get when someone walks over your grave. Every inch of my skin pulsed and stood on end, like a gazelle sensing a predator. Dozily, I wandered into the kitchen to grab a glass of water. While I was refreshing myself over the sink, I made the awful decision to look up and saw a sight which haunts me to this day. The boy from the year before. His face was pressed against my window, completely expressionless, with those wild, bulging eyes locked on me, unfocused. I jumped back, hitting the unit on the other side of the kitchen, giving me a searing pain on the back of my head. All the while, the boy continued to stand there, looking right into my kitchen. He made no movement to try and break the window. In fact, he showed no signs of wanting to hurt me at all. His hand was still outstretched, and the makeup he wore on last year's Halloween still etched his face, though more tatty than then, as though it had decomposed slightly. I slinked up to bed, and the next day, as before, he was gone. I was beginning to think a prank was being played on me. Now, this has happened every Halloween since that day in 2007. This boy has turned up, either on his own or with a group that doesn't know he's there, and just stares at me. I watched him until 2 a.m. a few years ago, while he stood at the bottom of the back garden, staring up into my bedroom. I thought about calling the police once or twice, but he showed no signs of aggression, so I don't know how much help they would be. What worries me is how he has not aged once over the last decade. Anyway, with Halloween so close, I just wanted to get this out there. I suspect he will be back again this year, and for once, I'm going to be tough and speak to him. I'm 35 after all, and he's just an orphan in Harry Potter's hand-me-downs. Happy holidays, everyone. Bill's Kitchen. Parents every year are petrified of their loved ones going missing, to be that one missing child on Halloween. Don't let it be mine, they pray. Decorations line my pathway from street to front door. Jack-o'-lanterns, skeletons peek behind plastic gravestones, goblin figures strewn across the lawn, a speaker playing the faint sound of a wolf howling, and terrible winds blowing, beckoning every child in the neighborhood. This is the house to visit on Halloween. And you know what? It is. I have a giant bowl full of sugary sweets on my porch, a welcoming smile for all who knock, and polite conversation for the parents who escort the little ones door to door, ensuring in this day and age the night stays as innocent as intended. But some parents don't go door to door with their little ones. Some think safety in numbers and send them with their friends off into the night.
Trick or treat!
The children gleefully chime in unison as I open the door, casting my eyes to the end of my driveway. No parents in sight. Wow, those are some scary costumes, I theatrically exclaim, hands in the air to a round of laughter from the younger children in the group. So who do we have here? I can see a zombie Darth Vader, a cowboy. You two must be those sisters from that Disney film Freezing. More laughter from the children. You must be a werewolf. Very scary. And you must be... Forgive me, but who are you meant to be, young man? Kneeling before the children, looking puzzled. Ah, yes. You are the Count himself. I'm so sorry, Mr. Dracula. With a smile, I raised to my feet again. I was going to say trick, to make you earn these sweets, but as you all look so fantastic, Would you like to choose from my private selection of sweets and collectibles? Only the best costumes in the area get to choose, and this year I think all of you make the grade. What do you say? Want to see? I take a step back, beckoning them in. Excitedly they follow. They always do. Leading them through the well-lit hallway, we come to the end. A simple, unassuming red door with a Bill's Kitchen sign above it and a long metal bar across the middle instead of a handle. Just through there, kiddies. I need to close the front door. Go ahead. The light switches to the left. As they enter, I turn back to them and close the red door. Opening the slat in the door, I peer in at the children as they begin to look bewildered. The younger ones start to cry. Bill, dinner's here. Kids, you might not want to pet Bill. He's not too friendly. Out of the shadows, Bill appears, a hulking mass of a dog. Parents every year are petrified of their loved ones going missing. To be that one missing child on Halloween. Now, 6 sets of parents can share in that ordeal together. Save some candy for the boy in the burlap mask. I know this might not sound strange at first, but hear me out to the end. Please, it just might save your life. See, I've gotten the same trick-or-treater since I moved into this house 5 years ago. The first year, I had my decorations all set up across my yard and a bowl of candy ready by the front door. The doorbell started to ring around 6 with little toddlers and their parents. Then it turned into the older kids, and from there it just didn't stop. It wasn't until around 9:30 or so when I finally got to sit down and catch the end of Friday the 13th, Part 4. Not the best in the series, but I needed something until I was tired enough for bed. It was just past 11 when the doorbell rang again. It had really caught me off guard, and I planned on ignoring it. Surely no kid would have been out trick-or-treating that late. But I also figured maybe it was a kid who had gotten hurt or needed some help. So I pushed myself out of my recliner. While I was walking up to the door, a god-awful stench had seeped into my house. It smelled like someone who hadn't taken a bath in a couple of years. I looked through the peephole. A small boy wearing some seriously out-of-date clothes and a burlap sack over his head stood on the other side. Truthfully, there was no way of knowing if it was a boy or girl under that mask. But I just felt it must be a boy under there. I stared through the peephole at the bizarre costume. There were no holes for his eyes or mouth. There were no marks on the mask at all. His clothes were filthy and worn out, covered in stains that gave me an idea where the horrible stench had come from. The icing on the cake, though, were the dark stains that ran down from the area where his mouth should be. I opened the door and he raised his head to look at me. In that moment, the eyeless sack had turned me to stone. My body got hot, and I actually started to panic a bit. I felt idiotic, saying I was scared of a little kid, but something about this boy really got to me. Seeing him just felt unnatural, like I had gotten a glimpse of something nobody should see. Jesus, kid, where the hell do you even get a costume like that? No response. Do you need help or something? No response. Are you hurt? No response. You're just out trick-or-treating? This time he nodded. I dropped a small Hershey's bar in his bag and wished him a happy Halloween. The kid still didn't say anything. He just turned around,
walked off the porch and crossed my yard to the next house. I locked my door and went to watch out the living room window. The boy went from house to house, and one by one each of my neighbors answered their doors and quickly dropped a treat in the boy's bag. Every year, after that, the boy with the sack over his head would ring my bell just past 11, and I would always give him a chocolate bar. He's never grown any bigger, and still hasn't said a word to me. The only thing that changes is his costume gets new stains each year, and the smell seems to get worse. After the first couple of years, he stopped weirding me out, and truthfully, I sort of started to look forward to the little bugger ringing my doorbell. Well, I did. Before last year. Last year at the beginning of October, some new neighbors moved in next door to me. When they were finished unloading their moving truck, I went over to welcome them to the neighborhood. They were a younger couple, and they seemed nice. I asked if they planned on decorating for Halloween, and told them if they needed any decorations, I had lots of spares. It didn't really come as a surprise when they said they weren't planning on decorating and would be having some friends over for a party instead of giving out candy. Seems like year after year, more and more people give up on Halloween. Still, I let them know about the particular little boy with the burlap bag over his head, and to make sure that at least they had something for him. Well, October 31st rolled around, and my doorbell rang at 11:05. I waltzed over to the door, as was tradition, and greeted the little boy with his usual Hershey bar and Happy Halloween. Dragging his bag behind him, he went down my porch steps and over to my new neighbor's house. I had been hearing the music from their house all night, so I was already prepared for the boy to ring the bell and not get an answer. I had never seen anyone not give the boy some type of treat. I guess I still haven't. He rang the bell, and like I figured, no one opened the door. I watched out the window as the boy shuffled down the neighbor's steps. He turned around at the end of their sidewalk and stared at their house. I had a lump in my throat. I didn't know what the boy would do. I was filled with a mix of nerves and anticipation. Then the boy turned and just wandered off to the next house. I felt relieved, but also pissed. I had been waiting up late each year a little bit, out of fear, over what would happen if I didn't. I guessed at that point the costume was a hand-me-down and had been getting passed from sibling to sibling over the years. That was the only way I could make sense of the non-growing child underneath. I went to bed that night feeling a little stupid for being scared of some kid all this time. From then on, I didn't plan on waiting up. My eyes opened wide to the sounds of screams next door. It was deafening. The woman was screaming like she was giving birth. I could hear her husband's cries for help under the screams. I got up in bed and grabbed my phone. The clock read 3 a.m. I called 911 and told them what I had woken up to. The operator said the cops were on their way and to remain inside. At some point while I was on the phone, the screaming had stopped. I hung up the phone and went to the main floor to look out my living room window. The neighbor's door was wide open. Their screen door was banging against the outside wall in the wind. 10 minutes or so passed, and the cops still hadn't arrived, and no more sounds came from the house. My curiosity got the better of me, and going against the instructions of the 911 operator, I grabbed my .45 from my safe and inched out into my yard. I approached as the screen door still swung wildly back and forth in the wind. I peered into the house. No lights were on. I took a couple of steps inside and crouched down low. That same unwashed smell that visited me every year filled the house. There looked to be a den to the right and the living room on my left. Behind the living room, I could see an LED clock in what I assumed was the kitchen. I took a couple of steps towards the den. A loud, wet slap came from the kitchen. I crept along the wall leading to the living room and felt the light switch against my arm. If someone was in there, turning on the light would have given me the jump on them. And if there was no one, I could continue my search, a bit less freaked out. God, I wish there had been nothing there. I pushed my arm up along the wall, raising my gun and turning on the light at the same time. Symbols had been carved all over the walls and floor. They were everywhere. The man I used to call my neighbor was laid out across the living room table, belly up. Each of his limbs were tied to a different table leg. A pool of blood had collected around the table. The symbols on the wall and floor were also carved all over the man's body, some on his arms, some on his legs, some even carved into his face. They were nothing compared to the harm the man's torso had undergone. From his collarbone straight down to his belly button was a deep cut, blood flowing from the wound onto the floor. Another wet slap came from the kitchen. The man's wife lay tied in the same way on the kitchen table. I shuffled over towards the corpse. I know I shouldn't have looked, and I know it was sick. I just felt compelled. Just like her husband, the same strange carvings could be found all over her body. But the woman's chest hadn't just been cut open. The skin was stretched and pulled back to each side of the table. Long ropes of intestines hung from her cavity down to the floor. Her organs were scattered across the linoleum flooring. The slapping sound playing in my mind. Worse than the horrible gouge she had endured was the little bites taken out of her insides. Tiny chunks of intestines missing, and even some of her skin looked to be chewed on. I threw up on the kitchen floor. My vomit splashed into the blood on the floor. Blue and red lights were dimly flashing on the walls by then, and I heard sirens getting close as I walked out of that nightmare back into the street. The cops suspected me at first, but they quickly realized I had no involvement. They never caught anyone. Surprise, surprise. I never told them what I thought had happened. How could I? They would have thought I was crazy. So I've chosen to share this here instead. Hopefully, some of you heed my warning. Tonight, if your doorbell rings later than it should, please make sure you have a treat put aside for the boy wearing the burlap mask. If you don't, he'll come back for one late in the night. It's a Living by the Graveshifter. I simply cannot help it. It all started out so innocently. However, I have since grown to love what I do. My friends and I have become experts in our chosen profession. Word spreads quickly when we happen upon a village or town. The grown-ups know why we have arrived and only allow their children to see us in the daytime. They keep their distance behind us, being respectful and all. Eventually, one child will whisper to a parent, "Is that really the witch killer?" I turn to face the child, finger to my lips, as if we are sharing a secret, and with a wink, I hand out a lollipop from my basket and answer, "Why, yes, I am, but you may call me Miss Gale. Miss Dorothy Gale." Why I'm cautious on Halloween. All my life, I've fostered a deep love for Halloween. Everything about it makes me tingle with joy and the expectation of a fun, spirited time. I mean, the weather is superb. The leaves of yellow, red, and brown are gorgeous. The decor inspires my infinite imagination. The treats are mouth-watering. The movies and shows leave me in a perpetual state of high anxiety. What's not to love? Within the last couple of years, I've become old enough to dress up for the holiday again. As a child, I, of course, slipped into a costume for the night. Then, as a preteen, it occurred to me that I was too old for such shenanigans, much like how it came to me that I was no longer little enough to play with my Barbies and dolls. I recently dove into my mid-20s, right as my daughter Olivia entered her toddler years, and it dawned on me that I am finally at an acceptable age to don a costume again. In addition to this, there is nothing more fun than having your child pick out a costume and trick or treat. I still love Halloween. I don't think anything could ever make me stop enjoying the night. However, I now approach Halloween like I'd approach a stranger in a dark alley, with caution. Olivia was about 1.5. She dressed as a dragon that year and looked absolutely adorable. I know, I'm biased, but it's true. We trick-or-treated for an hour before my sleepy baby vocalized by way of a tantrum that she'd had enough festivities and was ready for bed. I'd worked all day, so I was a bit relieved that we could head home. The walk home was nice. The sky was a deep slate gray, as it wasn't yet fully night. There was a cool breeze that carried to my ears the gleeful voices of children all throughout the neighborhood. At home, I bathed my cranky baby, slapped a fresh diaper and PJs on her, and tucked her in, planting a kiss on her forehead before leaving her to drift into sleep. For myself, I changed out of my headless horseman attire, grabbed a beer, snagged a few chocolates out of Olivia's pumpkin bucket, and settled into the couch to watch a horror film on TV. I sipped my beer, ate my stolen bounty, and cringed into the cushion at every jump scare. When the credits of the movie rolled, I turned the TV off and showered, ready for bed. I was getting myself some ice water when there was a knock at my door. I checked the oven clock, 10:39. Trick-or-treating ended at 8, but I figured maybe some teenagers were trying to stretch out the night, or perhaps wanted to dabble in some practical jokes, like Ding Dong Ditch. I tiptoed to the door and peered through the peephole. A weeping girl, probably about 16 or so, stood on my welcome mat, mascara running down her face. She was dressed in an outfit that reminded me of Little Red Riding Hood. Hell, what's this about? I opened the door. Are you okay? What's going... You gotta let me in. Please, please, Jesus, just let me in. I'm so scared. The stench of raw fear emanated from this girl. If she was playing a joke, she more than earned a fucking Academy Award. I instantly felt my stomach drop. I had Olivia sound asleep in her bed to worry about. Yeah, come on, hurry, I said, letting her in and shutting and locking the door. Oh, God, thank you, thank you. You've no idea. I've gone to 1,000,000 different houses, and no one would even acknowledge me. She peeled the red hood of her cloak off her head of long dark hair. What's going on? Are you hurt? Do I need to call your parents or the cops or both? No, she shouted, throwing her hands up in front of her. I flinched. She lowered her hands to her side. I mean, no, that's not necessary. I'm okay. Can I get a drink, please? Yeah, but you're gonna tell me what's going on, right? She solemnly nodded, chewing on her bottom lip. After I'd given her a glass of water, we sat on my couch. She guzzled the water down and put the empty glass on the coffee table. I cleared my throat. I didn't want to be pushy, but I had to know the extent of the situation. I was with some friends. We weren't trick-or-treating or anything, just walking around, goofing off. There's this party we were going to go to tonight. She twirled a strand of hair around her index finger. It's okay. Really. I was trying my best to sound like a safe and comforting adult, when really I felt like a terrified, insecure little girl. I wished I wasn't having to deal with this. Wished there was someone older around to take care of it. We went to the cemetery. Took some candles and stuff for a seance. Everything was just in fun. We didn't mean for anything to really happen. My arms broke out into goosebumps. I knew in the same way you can feel someone staring at you without ever seeing them. In the same way you know the teacher is about to call your name before she does. That whatever she was about to tell me was the truth. I squirmed in reluctance to receive it. I wanted my mom. At first, we thought it was a train because it sounded far off. Then we thought it was the wind, but the trees weren't moving. Then, that's when the grave next to us crumbled. We all screamed and scattered. I ended up alone, running past grave after grave. Her voice was getting shrill, hysterical, tears running down her cheeks. I tripped over something, and when I stood up, there was this woman standing in front of me. She was in a long black dress. Oh, God, and this terrible smell. She smelled like death. Her face, her eyes were completely white, and her mouth was open. She had all these teeth, like some kind of monster. But the worst part was the axe stuck in her neck, and her head was crooked, like it was barely hanging on. She swallowed and closed her eyes, rubbing her arms. She touched me, touched me with these long talon-like nails. I screamed and ran and tried to get someone to help me, and then you answered your door. I don't know where my friends are, but I'm so scared. Her pale face flushed suddenly. I was so scared, I wet myself. She whispered in a small voice, avoiding my face. I was stunned. I had no idea how to react. The rational part of me said, "This girl is messing with you." "You aren't fucking with me, are you?" "No," she cried. "I swear." I hate to ask this, but have you been using drugs?" She shook her head. "I had 2 beers hours ago. That's it." I wet my lips with my suddenly heavy tongue. "What about your friends? You don't think it's possible they were playing a joke on you?" She stared off into space. "I hope they were." An impregnated silence followed before I shattered it as I got up and started for the hall. "Just hang on a sec. I'm going to get my cell, so you can call your parents, okay? And I think I have a pair of pants you can fit into, too. Just breathe. You're perfectly safe now." She didn't answer me, just kept staring at nothing. The goosebumps materialized again. On the way to my room, I checked on Olivia. She was sleeping peacefully, blissfully unaware of the situation in the living room. When I returned, the dialer already open on my cell. The girl was gone. I raced to the door and flung it open. I looked up and down the street for her, but saw no one. Eaten alive with worry, but not knowing what to do, I barely slept that night. The next day, as Olivia was eating yogurt melts in her booster seat, I searched the living room for a book I hadn't yet read through in order to get my mind off the mysterious teenage girl. En route to the bookshelf, I paused in front of the couch. There where the girl had sat were what resembled bloodstains in 4 different places. 2 were on the cushion you sit on, and the others were painted on the top cushions. The sight knocked the wind out of me. Had she been bleeding? And how had I not noticed that she was bleeding, if she was? Why hadn't she told me she was hurt? As silly as I'd feel doing so, I felt compelled to call the police, to at least ensure this girl was safe, but the news anchor speaking on my TV halted my intentions and captured my attention. Hill Cemetery. The teenage girl was found dead at approximately 10 this morning by the groundskeeper. Authorities are not releasing details of her death at this time, but did state that she appeared to have died sometime last night. My gut screamed out, "It's the girl! It's the girl from last night!" I practically threw Olivia into her car seat in my haste to leave, buckling her and slipping behind the wheel in the driver's seat. I peeled out of the driveway, narrowly missing my mailbox, and zoomed through the streets of my neighborhood, neighbors openly gawking. 15 minutes later, I pulled into the parking lot of the sheriff's department. I burst through the entrance, Olivia in my arms, and jogged up to the front counter. Before the officer standing there had a chance to speak, I cried out, "I want to speak to someone about the teenage girl found at the cemetery." "Uh-huh. Yes, ma'am. Come with me." I followed the deputy through fluorescent halls of generic metal doors. He stopped outside one and... "Yeah? Lady to see you about that teenage girl." The door opened, revealing a squat, pudgy man with intense brown eyes. His eyes found my gaze and cooled considerably. Come in. I'm Sheriff Hughes." We shook hands. "I'm Laura Yoke." Olivia fussed as I squeezed into the dense office. I opted to stand so I could bounce her on my hip. "Please sit," he said, plopping down into his chair. "No, thank you. Oh God, this is gonna sound just so crazy. But last night..." "What time last night?" he asked, eyes averted as he scribbled in a notebook. The green digital numbers on my oven clock flashed before me. It was 10:39, to be exact. He added something to whatever it was he was writing, then set the pen down, folded his arms across his chest, and gave me his full attention. "This girl, a teenage girl, knocked on my door, and she's crying, hysterical. I let her in and asked what's wrong, and she says that she and her friends were having a seance in the cemetery. Something spooked them, and, well, she says she saw a ghost, I guess. And she's so terrified, more scared than I've ever seen someone in my life. I went to get my cell so she could call her parents, but when I got back to the living room, she'd left. I was up all night worrying about this girl, and today I noticed these red marks on my couch, where she'd been sitting. They look like blood to me. Then I heard the news about the girl found. He held up a hand. "Let's calm down a minute here. What was the girl wearing?" "A costume. Reminded me of Little Red Riding Hood, and she had long dark hair and pale skin." The stern man's face froze in shock for a mere fleeting second. He adjusted his collar and smiled. Okay. Sounds to me like we have us a little coincidence going on here." "Really?" "Oh God, that makes me feel a little better. She doesn't match the description then?" "I cannot say that. It's an ongoing investigation. But I am going to tell you something else that I shouldn't, because I see how concerned you are. Couldn't have been that girl. found this morning." He didn't have to say anything about the clothes the dead girl was wearing. I was positive my visitor matched the body in the graveyard based on his expression when I described her. "Wait a second. I saw your face when I described how she looked." He dismissed my observation. "Couldn't have been her. I say, because the girl found this morning was already dead by 10:30 last night. She was dead from about 8:30. I scoffed. "How accurate is time of death?" "Pretty damn accurate." "It's pretty accurate, ma'am." "So there. It couldn't have been the same girl, unless you are wrong about the time." No, I know it was 10:39. I know because I looked at the clock and thought about how trick-or-treating had ended right before I went to the door. I'm 100% sure of the time." "Okay, but what about the red stains on my couch?" He clucked his tongue and tipped his head to indicate Olivia on my hip. "Ma'am, toddlers are professional mess makers. She probably got a hold of something you didn't even realize she had and leaked it all over your couch. Don't you think you would have noticed if this girl from last night was wounded? I mean, was she acting hurt?" "No," I mumbled. "I even asked her if she was hurt, and she said no." There, it's settled then. Nothing but a coincidence. I left there feeling a tad foolish, despite a nagging voice in my head that said something was wrong here. I hadn't believed Sheriff Hughes was right, but I needed so badly to trust in his argument, to have a sense of closure about those strange events, that I convinced myself I was fretting over nothing. With a little time and some avoidance on my part of the news in any form, I settled back into normalcy and soon rarely thought of Halloween night, not until Thanksgiving. At Thanksgiving dinner, my aunt's husband, a sheriff's deputy in a neighboring county, brought up the cemetery murder after he was 3 drinks deep. You just wouldn't believe the sickos running around in society, pretending to be effing normal. Ugh, it just turns my stomach. Like that girl they found here at what's it called? He looked to my aunt. Park Hills. Yeah, Park Hill Cemetery. My blood turned to ice. That crazy shit. Now I know they kept the details out of the papers, out of respect for the girl's family, but I gotta tell you, because it is a perfect effing example of the kind of sickos I'm talking about. This guy, who they've never caught and probably never will, actually axed the poor girl's arms and legs. That's right, axed them, to make it look like that woman's murders from way back when. Robbie, maybe... Honey, please, I'm telling a story here. Let me finish. Wait, are you talking about Tallulah James? They made it look like Tallulah James killed her? Really? Remember, we used to tell each other the story of Tallulah when we were kids, Laura. My cousin intervened, wide-eyed. I said nothing. Whatever. The effer actually took her arms and legs. They haven't been able to find them. Oh, and he bit into her neck. Robbie! Aunt Paula yelled. Paula? It's Thanksgiving. Maybe we should find something more pleasant to talk about. Besides, Laura looks like she's seen a ghost. Around the dinner table, all eyes were on me. My family's soft laughter chimed. Their faces tilted and grew hazy as I slipped out of consciousness. When I opened my eyes, my mom was leaning over me. Easy, baby. You fainted. I just wanted you to rest right here. I've got Olivia. Do you need anything? I shook my head. Robbie doesn't know when to shut up. I mean, I'd rather not hear about that gruesome murder either, especially on a holiday. She sighed. I'll be back in a few to check on you. She kissed my cheek and departed. Lying on my childhood bed, the story from my youth sailed into my mind. I had always thought it was just a fun, scary story made up by some kid with an imagination the size of life. In the dark, one of us would whisper the tale of Tallulah James, the pastor's wife, who first poisoned him to death, then kidnapped a dozen children, murdered them, and axed their arms and legs off. Angry, suspicious townspeople coming to confront her found the rotting corpses of the missing children in her cellar. When they asked her what she did with their arms and legs, she smiled and replied, "Why, I ate them, of course." Her own cousin buried an axe in her neck. I didn't make the connection because I hadn't known how the teenage girl had been killed and had never contemplated whether Tallulah had been a real person, not till Uncle Robbie spoke about the graveyard murder, and that the woman's murders from way back when. I turned on my side, pulling my knees into my chest. Tallulah James had come for one last child, and that child, neither she nor I, knowing she was already dead, paid me a visit on her final Halloween night. I would like to give a heartfelt thank you to the special friends of the channel for your overwhelming generosity. If you would like to support the channel, the link is below in the description. Also, please send me your stories and poems to Duchess of Darkness 27@gmail.com. You can also find me on Instagram at Duchess.of_Darkness and Twitter at Duchess of Dark and 2. I want to thank all my listeners for your kindness, your encouragement, and your support. It means the world to me. Thank you for joining me. Until next time.